Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I'm just going to quickly go over how to use GoToWebinar for those who have never used the software before. So you can see on your screen there's a control panel on the right hand side as pictured on our slide here. If you don't see it, it may be because it's been hidden, and you can pull it back out by clicking on the Grab tab, which is that letter B. If you have any questions during the presentation, we'll be having a discussion at the end of the webinar, and you can put your questions in at any time by typing into the question pane. If you need assistance, please feel free to raise your hand, and someone from the staff will send you a message. And if at any point you have trouble with the audio, you may have forgotten to dial your audio pin. You can see that as soon as you log into the webinar. If you continue to have trouble, you may wish to close your GoToWebinar software and start it up again. And with that, we'll get started.
Well, good afternoon or good morning to everyone, depending on what time zone you're in. This is Carol Lincoln, Senior Vice President at Achieving the Dream. We're really excited to be able to initiate the new season's webinars. Normally we have a webinar every month for Leader Colleges, but because today's topic is such an important one for the whole network, we have opened up this webinar to our whole Achieving the Dream network, and we have a lot of folks on the line today who are listening in to hear more about the scaling work that's happened at some of our colleges. So thanks for joining us. We're really pleased to have everyone back and in touch again for the new academic year. I'm joined today on this webinar with some other staff from Achieving the Dream. Some of them you know, and some may be new to you because we have augmented our team a bit since we last had a webinar. Samad West-Keys is Associate Director of Programs, and he now has the responsibility for being our Chief Liaison with Leader Colleges. So you're going to hear more and more from Samad on these webinars as time goes by. He'll be facilitating the second half of this session today. Melanie Mulvey is someone that many of you have already been exposed to. Melanie's been helping us with these webinars for over a year now. She's Assistant Director of Programs. And then we want to give a special welcome to Tran Lee, who is one of our newest staff members. She began at Achieving the Dream a number of months ago as an intern, did such a great job for us that we offered her, and she graciously accepted to come on board as a program coordinator on our programs and policy team. So we couldn't be happier to have this new talent and these new folks working with us at Achieving the Dream. As is customary when we are doing Leader College webinars, we have an agenda that includes several parts. We have a small part where we share any updates we need to make about business that has to do with Achieving the Dream. We like to give a shout out to one of our Leader Colleges that's doing something exciting and is showing leadership. And then of course we have our presentation, question and answers time, and then finally some information about when the next webinar will be scheduled. So with that, let me just take a couple of minutes to hit on some highlights of ATD business. We're very excited that we can offer once again this academic year a series of technology solutions webinars. The next one starts on September 16th. These have been extremely popular with our network because what we've done is we've been able to find colleges in our network who are using some of the latest technology support from various IT companies, and they are able to present to our network how they're using those solutions, what kind of impact it's having on their programming and their work with their students. And we also have the IT company on board, so you can get a chance to hear how some of these emerging technologies can be used maybe in your environment. It gives you a little bit of insight, and you'll know whether or not you want to pursue using those technologies yourself. So look for September 16th for the beginning of those series once again, and they are open to the whole network. Another thing I wanted to call to your attention is that I've been sending messages out to your presidents about some leadership opportunities that are set up for them. If you would be so kind as to remind your presidents that they are getting invitations to participate in a series of leadership symposia being offered in collaboration with the Aspen College Excellence Program, we would greatly appreciate it. We have extended the deadline. You can find more information on our website about it. But essentially, this is an opportunity for presidents in small group settings to get together to talk about some of the challenges they're facing and to think together about how they as presidents can be leading the institutions in various aspects of the reform agenda. It might be in terms of working with employers. It might be in terms of partnerships with transfer institutions. It could be about guided pathways, or it could be about engaging productively with the faculty. So if you would, please remind your president that if they're a Leader College president, they're eligible to apply. And then the other thing is probably geared more to those of you who are on the line. The Aspen Institute has created a brand new presidential fellowship, and they are recruiting now for the first class of 40 students. These are people who aspire to become a community college president within the next 5 years, roughly. If this is something that's on your radar screen, if you're thinking about moving into the presidency in the not too distant future, or if you know others who are thinking about this, this is a very good opportunity to participate in a highly engaging and new fellowship opportunity, 1 year long. And we do have an agreement with the Aspen Institute that they will reserve a number of seats for applicants from Achieving the Dream colleges. So you've got a bit of a leg up on any applicant who might apply from a non-ATD college. I urge you to look at that. This is different from any other fellowship because it focuses mostly on what would you need to do as a president if you were trying to lead a reform agenda based on student success and completion agendas. So that's really right up your alley if you want to become a new president. The next thing I wanted to share with you, this is something we also do in all of our Leader College webinars, is we like to give a shout out to one of our colleges that's doing something interesting and that others might want to hear about. So today's shout out goes to Northampton Community College, where they recently announced the opening of a brand new campus in Monroe County. And there's a video which I encourage you to watch. It's only about 1.5 minutes long, but you get to see President Mark Erickson as well as some of the students at the college dancing to the song Happy as a promotional for the new campus. It's really a hoot. It's really fun to see a president who's willing to engage in a way that not only the faculty but the students really enjoyed. So take a minute when you need to be perked up a little bit and watch that video. It'll make you smile. It'll make you happy too. So with that, I want to turn the mics over to our colleagues who've agreed to join us today. The topic we're talking about is scaling, and we're talking about doing that based on the experience of 4 of our Leader Colleges who've been participating several years in something we call the Catalyst Fund. It's a funded learning initiative that has involved Bunker Hill, Brazelsport, Durham Tech, and Patrick Henry Community Colleges. 4 of them have been working on taking practice that they have found effective in scaling it across their institutions. So we've got Christine Kelly-Cleese, who's Vice President of Student Engagement and Development and Support at Durham Tech, as well as the evaluator of this effort, Derek Price, who's President of DVP Practice Limited. The 2 of them are going to walk us through some of the experience and some of the lessons that have come out of several years of work by these 4 wonderful colleges. So with that, I am going to turn the mic over to Christine and Derek and say thank you so much to both of you for being willing to do this today, and welcome to the webinar.
Thank you very much, Carol. This is Derek Price speaking, and I'm very happy to be joined with Christine Kelly-Cleese from Durham Technical College. We've tried to structure the next few minutes of the webinar, Christine and I, in a way to for me to give some broader sort of high-level lessons and picture and approach from the Catalyst Fund and our evaluation and what we feel we've learned about the how of scaling innovation at community and technical colleges. And interspersed between my remarks, Christine's going to step in and dig a little deeper into Durham Tech's experience and provide a little bit more texture and nuance to this work that I think most of the folks on the call or on the webinar will find particularly insightful and useful. So first, let me tell you about the Catalyst Fund if you're not familiar with it. This is a program where Achieving the Dream was supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the idea here really was grounded in some work, a framework of scale called More to Most that Abby Parcell at MDC put together. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with that. And that document lays out a strategy for colleges to build internal capacities that can enable programs or interventions to scale. So Catalyst Fund colleges, there were 4 of them, as Carol mentioned, were provided 2 years of grant funding, but then committed to continue their scaling efforts for an additional 2 years after the grant funding ended. The colleges represented a diverse set of institutions in which we then documented and learned about the process of scaling and further understand now the levers of institutional transformation that are necessary to achieve scale as defined by the Catalyst Fund initiative. I want to emphasize here that these Catalyst Fund colleges were not starting from scratch. They were building off of several years of efforts to institutionalize and expand innovative practices to improve student success on their campuses. In the context of the Catalyst Fund, there were 2 kinds of scale that colleges could pursue. These were not necessarily mutually exclusive. The first kind of scale, and the one that we'll spend most of today speaking about, was intra-institutional scale. And that really was about deepening the presence of an innovative practice within the college to reach most students in a target population. Now, the other aspect of scale was called inter-institutional scale. And this was about expanding that innovative practice to serve significantly more or most students in other colleges, so moving the practice beyond the college in which it was initially operating. So 2 kinds of scale, but we're going to focus on the intra-institutional scale. Now, our evaluation approach, next please. Our evaluation approach, we called it a case-informed study. The full evaluation report is available on the Achieving the Dream website on the Catalyst Fund page. You can also get that from my own website. But it was a case-informed study. We initially used a scaling framework that we had adapted from the research literature, most notably Coburn and Kizar. It also was adapted from work that my team had done through a FIPSI dissemination project led by Kingsborough Community College and involved 4 additional colleges nationally. And so our design was a case-informed analysis to examine the process of intra- and inter-institutional scale of the various innovative practices across the 4 Catalyst Fund colleges. In essence, these colleges became our laboratory as evaluators to examine and understand how scale happens in diverse higher education context. And so our presentation, as I mentioned before, is going to focus on intra-institutional scale. I do really want to emphasize here that while the framework launching this project was about moving from more to most in terms of serving students, we really were looking at scale as a process of institutional change that would alter the beliefs and norms of social interactions among college leaders. This is really where the literature is pointing us. And there's not a lot of that literature, I might say, but I imagine there's an awful lot of personal experience on the webinar today. At the end of this process, we identified transformative ingredients of scale, and we'll share those a little bit later. Next, please. As I mentioned before, we started the process with a framework, and it wasn't necessarily a scale framework. It was a framework about institutional transformation and redesign. And this was really built out of our FIPSI dissemination project that I mentioned before. This is a visual just to give you an idea of our initial thinking, our framing when we went in and observed and examined the Catalyst Fund colleges. And so what we had done is we identified in the center triangle here, in essence, 6 components, 6 ingredients is what we had called them, that we thought were important to focus on. And we called them ingredients because we sort of liked the metaphor possibilities here. We knew that all of these ingredients were necessary, but we didn't necessarily know what ratio the various ingredients should be involved. And we imagined that it might be different at different institutions, and in fact that proved to be the case, but all of them were important. And of course, surrounding the triangle, surrounding these various concepts that we were looking at to guide our evaluation work, we had this notion of reflection, a very challenging thing to do because of how busy everyone is on your campuses, certainly in our work, but we do have to take time to step back and reflect on the work that we're doing and discuss it with our peers and with our partners if we're going to move this work forward. Next, please. So I won't go into the details of this, but this gives you a quick snapshot of the 4 colleges that participated in the Catalyst Fund work. There were 4 practices here. There was a Learning Frameworks course from Broadsport College. There was Learning Community Seminars and Clusters at Bunker Hill Community College. There was a Cooperative Learning Pedagogy that Patrick Henry was expanding. And then, of course, there was the first-year experience at Durham Tech that Christine will talk about here in just a moment. And each of the colleges had to establish a baseline of where they were at. They, of course, had to document that these practices were showing promising success from an evidentiary standpoint at their campuses. And then they set goals of what they were seeking to achieve given the different definitions of scale that I mentioned before, intra or inter. In institutional scale. So Christine will talk a little bit more about the Durham Tech experience here to give you a little bit more richness about the work there at Durham Tech, and then I'll come back around and start to tie together what we learned at Durham Tech and other aspects of the evaluation. So Christine?
Thanks, Derek. I'd like to start with another shout out for Abby Parcell's work on the more to most piece. That was such a helpful frame for us when we started this work and really carried us through a lot of the process, helped building momentum for us when we ran into roadblocks, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It was very helpful to have that framework. So again, thank you, Abby, for your work on that. Our project for the Catalyst Fund work was scaling up our ACA 122 class, which is our first-year experience course. We had a very strong design here, a person who fostered that from its inception here, who's now our Dean for Student Engagement and Transitions, Gabby McCutcheon, who's done a beautiful job with this. So huge credit goes to her on designing something that was worthy of scale, really. So what this course is a first-year experience course, 1 credit hour, 2 contact hours now, that is for a particular target population, and that's for students who are in an associate degree, and you can see the listing of associate degrees that we offer here at Durham Tech there, for most of our diplomas and a handful of our certificates. Identifying that population of incoming students became an ongoing conversation within the Catalyst team over the years to be clear about who it is we're expecting to have this experience. And so that feeds into something a little bit later that we'll talk about as well. It is what we're calling a co-requisite for all developmental education courses. As of spring of 2014, another piece of the scaling was to then add that for our freshman English course. It's not really a co-requisite. We use that because people understand what that means, but it's sort of a one-way co-req. It's a registration rule so that students in the target population, when they register for DevEd or for English 111, they also must register for ACA 122 if they don't have the waiver on their record, which means they're not in the target population. So students who have 12 or more college-level transfer credits upon entry are waived. The course is optional. We still have a large number of students who choose to take it because it has such a great reputation on campus, but they're not in our direct target population. We are currently running between 45 and 50 sections each term. There are different delivery methods you can see there. Those choices are the result of an action research study that Gabby McCutcheon did to determine what was the best approach, and this is what we've settled on. Next slide, please. They are taught by full-time Durham Tech employees, and that's a deliberate choice as well. We want the faculty members to be highly engaged and highly engaging with our students and to know deeply the processes and information on campus, the relationships on campus, so that they can really help students navigate that first term. There are 2 full-time instructors who are teaching the course, and that is their primary job duty. There are 5 academic advisors in our advising center and they're staff and faculty. So they're required to teach 2 sections of the course as part of their job descriptions and have primary duties as academic advisors other than that. That was a key piece of what happened as a result of the Catalyst Fund work in really bringing the areas of instruction and student support together in structural ways, not just asking somebody in the student services area to teach, but this really was a blurring of those lines, which has then morphed into huge structural redesign of the college that I can talk about a bit later as well. There are 6 other college employees who are currently teaching the course as part of their job duties, and that's partly because they have a particular affinity for this kind of work and this level of engagement with students, and also as a connection to maybe their job. For instance, the chair of the first year experience is teaching. There are lots of opportunities for support for those faculty members. The Sakai site, which is our LMS, has sample syllabi for them, assignments worked out, weekly lesson plans down to the minute. If they want to be highly structured, they can. They can also be innovative on their own, and they share their ideas with each other regularly. In order to teach the class, you would have to go through a 10-hour training session, which also has an incredibly positive reputation on campus. There are over 100 people on campus who've gone through the training because they find it so valuable, even if they don't intend to even ever teach the course. And then we do a 3-hour refresher training for those faculty, and again, those regular meetings. Next slide. So this course is built around 3 major themes. It's goal discernment, and that's for students understanding their options for eventually transferring to a senior institution, understanding what their career goals are and where their career goals and academic goals maybe can align together, understand what those pathways are for them, and plan out what they're going to take every semester to reach their goals. Learning strategies, that's typically what you think of when you think of a first-year experience course, or many people do, and that's things like time management, test-taking strategies, and those kinds of learning assessments and things like that. College culture is another big piece, so really helping students engage with and understand their relationship and where they fit in to the campus structure and processes, and building relationships within that classroom setting and within the college. The textbook we're using is one that was written by 2 of our faculty members. That's Gabby McCutcheon and Erin Riney. You can see the information there. And over to you, Derek.
Thanks, Christine. Now, our big evaluation question across these 4 colleges was about scale. How did the colleges pursue scale, and were these strategies effective in helping them achieve scale and serve more or most students? I won't bore you with a lengthy discussion of our methodology, but in doing this, we were using primarily qualitative techniques. We visited various colleges, sometimes more than once. We had interviews and focus groups with various stakeholders throughout the campus. We observed and interviewed staff and faculty at various learning events that Achieving the Dream had, or that other events that were scheduled as part of this work, and whatnot. So we did lots of things to try to examine how this was going on, again, using that initial framework that I described earlier from our 50 dissemination project. Next slide. The bottom line here that I know many of you are wanting to hear is what did we find? What mattered in terms of helping these colleges achieve scale? And I should say that in the focus of interinstitutional scale, our really focal points were Durham Tech and Bunker Hill in Massachusetts. Those were our 2 colleges that really laid out that as their objective. And so that was where we spent an awful lot of time to understand these processes of scaling. I can tell you that we found that both colleges did achieve scale in terms of moving their innovative practice from more to most. And we believe they did achieve those outcomes because they applied the various transformative ingredients that is necessary that I laid out in the outline at this point. Leadership at both colleges committed to sustaining the innovations. Faculty and frontline staff bought into the innovative practice and took shared responsibility for the scaling work. And these innovative practices became business as usual, including how stakeholders across campus interacted with one another to improve student success. Of course, the challenge of all this is how to build the systems on your campuses, design the policies that you need, and establish that buy-in that enables the spread of innovation seen in the catalyst colleges to occur. And so we've identified here on this slide sort of 6 areas of work. Oh, nope, actually go back, please. Stay on this slide. Yes, thank you. 6 bullets here, really this is the focal areas. If you're going to scale something, whether it's the ACA course that Christine is talking about or any other effective practice on your campus, these are the kinds of things you're going to need to focus on and work on intentionally. You need to have distributed leadership and collaborative decision making. This means that a solution in academics doesn't require only academic folks to be involved. There may be implications for registration, for orientation, for advising, and those folks should be brought in a collaborative way early. There needs to be broad engagement with both formal and informal communication processes so people know what's going on. That way no one's surprised when suddenly it's their turn to get involved and they need to begin to think about making changes in their area. There needs to be a regular use of data to monitor progress and for continuous improvement, and I will say that Durham Tech particularly stood out here in terms of how they struggled and had challenges but were able to overcome that and use data effectively to make sure they were making the progress they wanted to make. Another key aspect that we learned that making policies default rather than opt-in are really important. And this, of course, was the case in what Christine just described. For ACA, there are certain students in which they have to take this course. They can't, it's really hard to not take this course if you're in the target population. I'm sure people fall through the cracks, but very few of them fall through the cracks. And that means that policy is default. That's the way you do business at Durham Tech now. These scaling efforts also have to be tied to administrative and financial priorities. It's not enough to think of this work as this is a cool, effective practice that we're going to scale and think you're going to achieve scale as sort of a project. It just doesn't work that way. This project, this practice, must become part of the administrative and financial priorities of the institution. And then lastly, leveraging external networks to create momentum and accountability. In this particular case, the Catalyst Fund was like a sub-network of colleges all seeking to scale innovation. They weren't scaling the same practice, but they were all seeking to change their institutional structures, processes, and decision-making. And that network really created, in some ways, positive competition with one another, but great opportunities for learning. And of course, the Achieve and Dream is the broader network here that helps create momentum and accountability for folks. So that's the high-level findings on interinstitutional scale. We're going to go back to Christine and let her put that in the context of Durham Tech.
I'm going to be mindful of time here and just lift up a couple of these a little bit. And number one is probably the most important piece for us, that we had the right people on this team. It was such an incredible convergence of skills and level of engagement and buy-in into the work. So we had someone that I would call the big picture ideas person, the really great communicator who kept us all excited and kept the communication flowing within the team and on campus, a very skilled, thoughtful data person. That person shifted over time but continued to be the rock for what we needed to do and helped us keep focus on why we were doing what we were doing. And then the closer, the doer, making sure that we were getting things done and setting an agenda and following through. So we were able to work really, really well together. In my 22 years of experience, it's the best team I've ever worked with. We were deliberate from the outset to blur the lines between instructional services and student services in very concrete and structural ways, and that meant so many different changes in processes and workflows and people understanding what their role was. So it was less of, this is my lane and I need to stay in my lane, and more of, welcome into my lane, let's work on this together. And we now have a new division that is called Student Engagement, Development, and Support, that brings together, if you're familiar with Completion by Design framework, really a focus on the entry and connection and entry pieces at the front end, but then also our work is focused on keeping students clearly and soundly on their academic and career pathways, and anything that will support them or keep them from falling off that path, we step in there as well. And we've added another piece at the end of that continuum called transition, that we also help them make that transition to the senior institution or into meaningful work for them. So that's a key piece of the design of our work. We obviously had very strong support on campus, a clear vision, a clear goal, lots of engagement. We learned an important lesson that notifying people of the work is not enough. We need to involve as many people as we possibly can. And we can build momentum and goodwill not just through showing growth. It's not just about scaling up. We could get all these students in this class, but we need to also pay attention to, are we having the intended effects on student persistence and student completion rates that we, which is at the core of why we're doing this. And of course, those relationships externally have been really helpful to us in just numerous ways. Next slide. Okay, and so here is one of our favorite data slides, and this is showing both the growth and also in persistence and in the students who are in that target population, whether they've persisted. And this is a fall to spring persistence rate slide. You can see on the top in the blue, students who are successful in the course have very high persistence rates. Those who are unsuccessful in the course, as you might expect, have the lowest persistence rates. But that yellow line is students who are still not, they're in the target population, but they're still not taking the course when we intend for them to. And so that is our real concern there, those students and the students who are unsuccessful. So our attention now is focused on, let's look at that population and be deliberate. There are students that we know, and we all know the first couple of days of class, that they're likely not to make it through the class successfully, or likely not to persist. So looking at interventions to step in there is really our next step. And I think the next one goes to Derek.
Yeah, and Samad and Melanie, I think I want to be mindful of time too, looking at it and have people the opportunity to ask questions at the end. So I'll just put this up here momentarily. I'm not going to talk about these 5 transformative ingredients other than to say these are not in rank order. They're not in sequential order. It's just a numerical list of 5 areas in which if you want to create institutional transformation and change and scale effective practices, these are the areas in which you need to be working in an intentional and deliberative way. And you can look at the documentation to get more details around these 5 things. Christine, I don't know if you want to hit your last slide or just jump to the big takeaway. Do you have a preference?
The one thing I'd lift up on that last slide is that, of course, with any scaling, you're going to run into roadblocks. We had plenty of them. But because we had the right people at the table who were focused on the goal and were willing to see things through, we were successful. We've been successful. We continue to be. We ran into important data issues that informed our work, and you can read those in our case study, which will come out through Achieving the Dream sometime soon. So our big takeaway here that you can see is that it requires a willingness and commitment to change organizational structures, to address power and hierarchy, build a common vision. It takes a lot of people and a clear understanding of what the goal is and a willingness to stay the course.
All right. Well, thank you both, Christine and Derek. And at this moment, we want to open up for questions. I just want to remind everyone that they can go ahead and type in questions in the question box on the side panel. We do have one question, and it is, does Durham Tech have data on fall-to-fall persistence?
Yes, we do. We are drowning in data.
Okay, can you share?
Not off the top of my head, but if the person who's interested wants to email me some specific questions, I can send responses.
Okay. Another question we have is, can you describe what do you mean by side-by-side leadership?
Derek, do you want to take that? I think we lost Derek. Okay, so side-by-side leadership. So I'll give you a specific example here at Durham Tech, and that is that as in my former position as Dean for Student Engagement and Transitions, I was leading this work. But I had another dean in student services, in advising and enrollment services, who was working closely with me, and we were both having similar conversations with another leader on campus who said, you two need to talk because you're saying the same exact sorts of things sort of in a parallel way of what Christine wants to happen in instructional services and what Kaylee wants to have happen in student services. And when we got together and talked through things, we realized this is the answer. We need to be working side by side and understanding where the roadblocks are on both areas of the college so we could navigate all of that. And that's really where one of our biggest lessons and biggest strength was in doing this work.
This is Derek. I'm wondering if you can hear me now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, super. So side-by-side leadership, thanks, Christine. That was a great example. We were really trying to get at the notion here that solutions and practices in one area of the college tend to affect other areas as well. and yet too often the work that goes on doesn't cut across those areas. And so we need to create leadership opportunities for folks in different divisions, different departments to work together to solve these problems, to implement these practices at an early stage. It can't be at the end of the day. We realize that we want to have 50 sections and then ask the registrar to figure out how to find spacing. We have to do that early to make sure that everyone understands the various timelines and various actions that have to be taken to achieve the objective. That means that we have to cut across silos. We have to involve people from the beginning. We have to have those shared conversations from folks who may not typically speak to one another on a day-to-day basis because of the work that they're doing.
Okay. This question was geared towards Christine, and the person asked, did you have any resistance from the faculty in making the FYE courses a requirement? And if you did, how did you address it?
Years ago, we did, and that's a great point. We started this work 10 years ago. We started with the first year of Achieving the Dream. That's 2004. And at that point, we were doing some version of this course, and things were starting to scale up. We were deciding this was the right way to go, and there were different opinions among the faculty about what this should be. You can see that the name of our course now is College Transfer Success. Initially, we ended up with two different courses, one for students in AAS programs who were not planning to transfer, and one for transfer students. What we realized was that students need to understand all of their options and not track one way or the other. We had students in each class deciding they wanted to do the opposite. And so it really is important on the front end to have students consider all of their options and really commit in that first semester to this is going to be my path. So once we made that shift, and the other piece of this is that course is transferable, the credit is transferable to the universities, and it started to share the data, and people started to see that what a positive effect taking the course had on student outcomes, and then also through the training, which again was so beautifully executed, it created such a positive buzz on campus that everybody wanted to do the training and have that experience, even though they didn't necessarily plan to request to be able to teach the class.
Okay, thank you. And one question we have is, are there any tips for overcoming initiative fatigue, and how do you keep resources focused on your initiative when new ones continue to come on board?
Can I take that just at a high level, Christine? I imagine your more concrete response will be more meaningful, but I do feel it important to say already if you're thinking about scaling work as an initiative, you're probably not going to be successful. So whatever it is that you're scaling, you need to tie it into the administrative and financial priorities of the institution. It has to be connected to that work so that everybody, whatever their responsibility is, whatever their role is, whatever level within the hierarchies in college campuses you are at, you're paying attention to that effort. So if this starts out as an initiative and it stays an initiative, the very problem that you're describing, initiative fatigue, is likely going to come up and hurt you. It has to be transformed into something other than an initiative, but a mechanism to change the way you do business at your college. That's not an initiative. That's about organizational change.
And that is really where we came to over time, that when new opportunities would come up, we pulled together our core team, and our core team turned into the co-chairs, and the co-chairs had to each be from different divisions. For each piece of the work, then would sit on the core team, and we were really mindful whenever we were thinking of adding something new that we needed new leaders coming onto the core team, and we needed to make sure that whatever that new piece was fit into the larger model of where we were moving the institution. So it's been very helpful to sort of have that framework and understand that that's how we determine whether we pursue the next opportunity or say yes to something that someone's trying to push forward.
All right, well, thank you both. So unfortunately, we have more questions than we do time, and for that reason, what we will do is share the presenters' contact information with you all to ask the question, but what we will also do is share the questions with the presenters and the individuals that ask the questions so that you all can talk about that post the webinar. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for their time. Just a quick bit of housekeeping for the Leader Colleges that are on the line. Our next Leader College webinar will be Thursday, October 1st, and the subject will be teaching students with mental health and substance abuse issues, and we'll have Everett Community College who will help us facilitate that webinar, and it will be 12:30 p.m. to 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can go ahead and register now. Once again, I just want to take the time out to thank our presenters and thank everyone who was on the call today and helping us address these issues, which are very, very important in the community. So thank you once again. Thank you all for your time, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.